Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic episode, just like always. So today we have a lot of questions about Ukraine and the Zelensky meeting last week from the Cognitive Elite. So as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics for less than $16 a month if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highly-respected.com. And if you would just like to listen to all the great content on there, both the Mailbag and IQ supplements that are posted every week, you can just sign up for the paid subscription there as well. So we're going to get into the questions about Zelensky first. So we've got about 3 different questions specifically about the Zelensky meeting. Stealth Bomber asks, what was the intention behind the Zelensky meeting? Was it actually just to humiliate him? Does the outcome signal the end of any further aid from U.S. to the Ukraine? Additionally, how much will this matter to normies? I'm definitely enjoying the meltdown for both libs and Euros, but I worry if this spat was too much for the average person. And then K-Max also asks about the meeting. He says, Scott, your view of foreign policy and Trump and Vance's tag team on Zelensky, does this reset it at all? Scott, I posted, and he showed the clip of the exchange rather. And then Renown has also talks about it. He says, it's not true Zelensky doesn't have leverage. His cards are weak in one sense. He can't fight this war without American help, but if they are strong in another sense. Trump doesn't want to see Ukraine crumble under Russian advances the way it happened to the government in Kabul during Biden's rule. Trump can't afford to deprive Ukraine of U.S. aid. Biden's poll numbers never recovered after the fall of Afghanistan. That's without even mentioning how strongly Ukraine is supported by the American and Western elite. So Trump is as much locked up in there with Zelensky or any other Ukrainian president on the off chance Zelensky resigns, as is the other way around. That's also why Trump was about to sign the mineral deal, which would guarantee further U.S. entanglement in the war. We've got a few more Ukraine questions are dealing with the topic, but I'm just going to get into the Zelensky meeting, and then we'll go on to the other, because there's a few questions about European reaction, future of Ukraine, other things. So our right-wing supporters of Ukraine. So I will get to those questions after we talk about the Zelensky meeting. So I don't think it was scripted. There are these notions that this is just theater, that they perfectly planned this, that it was intended to do this. But it's not the case, because, they had like a nearly hour-long meeting, and you watch the video and they're getting along. And just at some point, Zelensky really didn't like what J.D. Vance had to say and began lecturing him. And then that pissed off Trump and Vance, and the rest is history. And that's why it happened. And Zelensky has had this behavior before with other world leaders. Ukraine had this like lecturing, hectoring tone with Germany for a long time, that they were like, we're not going to do anything with Germany, and telling like Germany like they're the subordinate, even though they're dependent on German aid. And Zelensky got into a shouting match with Biden in 2022 over such matters, because this is a part of his personality, that he will just not shut up and let things be. And his lecturing to Vance, the vice president of the United States, in the Oval Office, obviously was going to piss off Trump and Vance. And I don't think it was his intention, because what is the gain for Zelensky by doing this? Zelensky pisses off Trump and Vance by doing this, by giving them a tone, and it frays relations between his chief ally. He needs America more than we need Ukraine, by far. So I don't think it was just pure theater. I don't think it was scripted. I don't think it was intended. Now, the meeting there was to sign this mineral deal and to give more aid, and to secure aid for Ukraine. And Zelensky went in there and he was like, oh, we love the president, blah, 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 everything's great. And then Vance brought up, during their exchange, that he campaigned for the opposition, which he did. He went up into Pennsylvania with Democrats and was like, thank you, Democrats, for all your support. It is outrageous what Zelensky was doing. So the meeting was not supposed to end that way. But I think it's a fact that Trump and Vance wanted to have this media. They did want a media show. They wanted to show to the media that, hey, look, we're not meeting behind closed doors. We're just going to have this meeting out in the open. And then it went south. And so I would say that that is what was the intention behind the meeting. It was just Zelensky went there to beg for money. But I mean, he made a lot of errors. It's like Trump advisors told him, wear a suit. Trump doesn't like you not wearing a suit. Trump is clearly, when they first met at the door, he's like, wow, you really dressed up. He's mocking him. He's clearly irked. Is like, why aren't you wearing a suit in the White House? And they didn't and there was this boomer reporter. I mean, he's not a boomer. He's a Gen Xer, the boyfriend of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I think he's with Real America's Voice, not One America News, or it's one of those places. And he's like, why don't you own a suit? Which is kind of like a, embarrassing moment. It's kind of awkward thing to do. I mean, it's funny on one hand, but it's awkward at the same time. And also, Zelensky doesn't speak the best English. As you can see, he's struggling to carry things through. But all he really knows how to say is how to hector us. And he did that on Fox News as well when he was like, they're like, are you going to apologize? He's like, no apology. And so he didn't do that. But yeah, I think it was an awesome moment because people really are tired of Zelensky, especially on the right. I'm tired of him as well. I'm tired of the whole act he has. The issue is that Zelensky is probably the most moderate person they're going to have in Ukraine, because all the other people are more fanatical in waging the war. Also, Zelensky generally has to worry about getting assassinated or couped if he signs a peace deal. I mean, this is a completely lawless country. This has multiple avenues of power. He still doesn't have control over the militias. The militias could easily topple him. Generally, they have eliminated most opposition to the war. Whether they've arrested them or those people have just fled to the Russian-controlled parts or, to Russia itself, they have eliminated any internal opposition to the war within Ukraine. And there's this feeling among the right that, if they had elections, they'd vote for peace. No, they'd probably elect someone even crazier. It's like they'd elect someone even crazier there. It's like, really, we just had to pull the plug and say, no more money. You're signing this deal. And then I don't know what the hell happens to Ukraine, but it's, we've spent enough money on this. I'm tired of these Eastern Europeans. We're going to get into the European moments, but I'm tired of these Europeans demanding that we pay for this. And it's like their security and whatnot. It's not our fault that you guys don't invest in any security. It's not our fault that you don't want to pay your fair share in NATO. It's also, I don't know why they support this war when it's destroying their economy and helping us, helping our empire. So, no, it was an awesome moment. My thoughts on it is I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed every 7 minutes. I mean, you've been wanting people to say that to Zelensky since 2022, and Trump and Vance finally did that. And it's like, where's our thank you? And it's really just telling him look, we're not your bitch. You're ours. There's a power imbalance here. You don't have the power. We do. And you are living at the behest of us. You do not come to the Oval Office, to our house, the people's house. Well, I think that might be more Congress, but you do not come to this symbol of America, this institution of America, and tell us what to do and give us a fucking lecture. Know your place and wear a suit. And I think it was, something that we've all been wanting to hear, and Trump finally delivered that. And so I enjoyed that. But now on the part of renown saying, his cards are weak or in leverage, if Ukraine makes a peace deal, they're not going to crumble. Also, they're just not, we're not going to fully withdraw the money and then just let Russia take over. Really, the thing is, we're going to tell them, look, you're going to lose your money unless you sign a peace deal. and threaten them to push that. I don't know. He really doesn't have that. That's not really leverage on Zelensky's part. That's more just our considerations of what we want to happen. And if they, if they reach a deal, Kiev doesn't fall. We're calling it Kiev. I'm not calling it Kiev. If Kiev doesn't fall, it looks good for us. And it's almost accepting what's been the case since 2014 is that Russia controls some parts in the east and Crimea. Maybe they control a little bit more than they did in 2014. They probably will under any peace deal. We'll have to see which areas they annex. Whether it's the 4 oblasts and Crimea that they fully annex, or if it's just 2 plus Crimea, 3 or whatever, or it's not even, they don't even agree to annexation. They just create a ceasefire line, and then they don't make a permanent peace deal. They just stop fighting, and then they just have a long-term ceasefire. In some ways, like it's similar to Korea. Who knows? And they just acknowledge that line. So I don't think it's so much that Zelensky has much leverage, because Zelensky's not like, oh, well, if you don't pay us, we're going to crumble. I mean, Zelensky's the loser in that, more the loser than America is. He can't afford to deprive them, like just cut them off immediately. That is true. But at the same time, it would be very bad for America for Russia to reach Kiev. But I don't think Russia can reach Kiev, even if we cut off the aid. They're going to still last for a few months. Now, let's say if they cut it off like this week, I think Russia probably would reach Kiev, or take a huge chunk of territory by the end of the year. And Ukraine would crumble. But Ukraine would probably sue for peace, and Russia would accept a peace. And Trump is just using that as leverage. So, I mean, yes, he does have cards, but it's more, Zelensky's still the bigger loser here than America. And Zelensky doesn't want to play that card either. He doesn't want to flee. He still wants to be in control of his country. So, I don't know. I don't really see it as that, like he's locked in with Zelensky. I think it's that he can use this as leverage in a way that Biden was never willing to do. It's the same with Israel. Biden was never willing to cut off aid to Israel. Thus, there was no fucking leverage with Ukraine or Israel. And he was never willing to cut off Ukraine from aid. Actually, we always wanted to give them more. Now that they have someone saying, this is all dependent on you making a peace deal and threatening them and embarrassing him, then that pushes Zelensky to the peace deal or the peace table. So that's my thoughts on the meeting. Trump wanted the mineral deal, but it's just further. I don't think it's further entanglement in the war. It's just further entanglement in Ukraine. But I mean, really, whatever happens, like America is going to be involved in Ukraine. We're going to have to rebuild it. We're going to have put all this investment in it. There's going to be tons of opportunities for American businessmen in Ukraine following the war. I mean, I'm not saying this is like a good or bad thing. I'm just saying that's how it is. For what's left of it. So, the mineral deal is just that we're further entangled with Ukraine, not so much the war. That's my thoughts on it. So it's a matter of Ukraine. I mean, the mineral deal is maybe a way of convincing Trump to stick with Ukraine, but it's not so much locked in. He still has much more freedom of movement than Zelensky does. So now we're going to go to how Europeans are reacting, because we've got a couple different questions on this. Dollar Bill asks, Europeans are livid after Zelensky came to the White House seeking a paycheck when instead got a reality check. They're doubling down on support for Ukraine, and a Norwegian fuel company announced it would no longer provide fuel for American forces and ships in Norway and urged other Europeans to follow the lead. This got me thinking, are we seeing the rise of an anti-American Western group comprised of Europe and Canada? This bloc, I guess you could call it the Libtard International, seems to be defined by these attributes. 1. Fanatical support for Ukraine. 2. Replacement levels of immigration from the global south. 3. Anti-populism. 4. Restrictive hate speech laws. Is the rest of the left so devoted to progressivism that they will secede from the global American empire because they find high Trumpism so distasteful, or will they inevitably come back to Washington after they're having their temper tantrum? I think I have another similar question from Jersey Guy. Yeah, it's also about Europe. I think also Preston has a question, so I'm going to include all this. He says, can you talk about the European elite mindset of why they seem to be unable to adapt to the new realities of the world? It's not just the Ukraine war, but in all facets of the economy, military, etc. They really do think of themselves as way more important than they are. It's because they cling to a moralistic view of the world, even more so than the United States, that they cannot accept that Ukraine cannot win the war, even as it continues to destroy their economies and as they fall further behind the US and China, even Russia militarily. And yeah, Preston asks, actually, no. He, that's a right-wing nationalist. I'll save that for next. I think that's, yeah, I'm just making sure that all the Ukraine stuff is taken care of. So yeah, that is so we're going to say about what these European libtards are thinking with Ukraine. They're just having a temper tantrum. They are not serious about forming their own bloc. First off, Canada and Europe have no fucking military. Like, their whole defense needs are taken care of by us, by America. They do not have real militaries. Okay, when France intervened in Libya, we had to pick up all the slack because they didn't have enough fighter jets to make the rounds to do their attacks on to Libya. We had to do it all, pretty much all for them. They do not have military capacity to defend themselves. They are just having a temper tantrum because the comfortable world that they have built up over the last really 70, 80 years is coming to an end. Is that they, when they lost great power status after World War II, they realized this, fully realized this with the Suez Canal crisis in 1956, that they're no longer great powers, that they are playing second fiddle to America. They then came to terms with that, and then they built up these generous welfare states, and they stopped worrying about their militaries and being great powers. And it was a comfortable arrangement for them. They were able to feel superior to America while depending on America for defense needs. Now America is saying, we're not really happy with this arrangement anymore. We're spending a lot of money to defend Europe. We're still paying for all this stuff, and you're not paying your fair share. And then you're demanding all these things from us. And at the same time, they're doing idiotic measures like eliminating their energy supply for climate cultism, and also imposing restrictive hate speech laws and all these other things, and demanding fanatical support for Ukraine despite them this hurting their economy. We're just saying we're not really excited about this arrangement anymore, and we might think about leaving NATO. And this doesn't really impact America directly. Now, some might say, like, oh no, this is going to end the American empire and blah, blah, blah. No, it's not going to happen. I guess Europe could work with China, but, I don't think that we're still going to have a lot of economic influence over Europe. And they're still going to have a lot of dependency on us that they're not going to want to go full on into working with China or even Russia. But their world that they have been built up for many, many years is crumbling. And they don't know what to do, and they're just lashing out. And they still think of these ways that they can do these moralistic arguments, that they can just tell Trump what to do, and that they can tell him off and whatever. Same with Zelensky. Zelensky feels like he can just give a moral lecture to Vance, and then we have to sit there and take it. He just clapped back at Vance. No, we're not going to take it. And Euros have this idea that if they wag their finger enough at Trump's face and American leaders, that will come to the table and then do provide free defense for them and all these goodies so they can carry on being, the continental retirement home. And that's really what a lot of like Europe is. Like they don't have like the ability to exert power anymore. And it gets also more problematic when like Eastern Europe, that they're like, we must maintain strong Poland or strong Estonia or whatever. And they're pretty much just want to be colonized by America. They're like, please send your entire military to our country, and I don't. It is very annoying that they give us these lectures, and you can even see this with the Euro right wingers. I'll get to this in a moment, but no, they're not serious. They're not serious. They're not going to do anything. They don't have the ability to do anything. They're not going to form these alliances. They don't have that ability right now to be an independent united Europe. And anyway, like a lot of right wingers think like independent united Europe would be epic. It would most likely be like people like Angela Merkel running the show. They're dedicated to hate speech laws and destroying their energy supply and doing a lot of other stupid stuff and having this economy in stasis that doesn't grow, doesn't prosper, doesn't pioneer anything. They just keep everything as status quo, and it's not even like a serious power. And then their military devotes more time to correcting gender imbalances within their infantry than they do with actually building a lethal fighting force. Like their militaries are, if you talk to any American guys who train with them or were out with them in Afghanistan or Iraq, they're not serious militaries, okay? And a lot of the Western European ones, they're very feminized, much more so than America. I mean, we worry about America feminizing. Our combat arms is still overwhelmingly male. They threw in like a few like women to like have a press release. It's still very male. Our combat arms are far superior than any other military in the world. Despite, all the weird stuff you see, like their LGBT stuff and whatever that the military's been producing, the combat branches are still very lethal, still very serious, far more serious than anything that Europe has. And we also have a powerful Navy and Air Force, all things that Europe does not have. So, like we rule the seas. So none of these things we really, China is challenging our naval supremacy a little bit. I know that that's becoming a problem, but that's another matter. That's not Europe. That's America. That's China, rather. So I think you gotta keep all these things in mind. I don't think it's very serious. I think they're just having a temper tantrum that there's a new world order happening and they don't know what to do and they're scrambling around and they're having disturbances with these nationalist parties coming to the fore. They're doing stupid stuff with their energy supply, as I said, and now they don't know what to do with their defense. I mean, and most of their military equipment is been sent to Ukraine. What are they going to do? And so they don't know what to do, and they're losing their minds. So I view it more as a temper tantrum. I mean, it'd be cool if you had base United Europe, but I mean, they need a dominant power in Europe to tell everyone else what to do. And they currently don't have that. They do not have a leader. They need a leader to direct them in the right direction, and they currently don't have that. I mean, the closest thing they have is Macron, and I don't think he's really the ideal person in this situation. And he's not really capable of doing what's necessary. So, no, I don't think it's anything to worry about. And they're gonna complain, they're gonna bitch and moan. But if America tells them like, okay, you've had your temper tantrum. Now you're going to do what we say, and they're going to all do what they say. Because, I mean, it's like the British ambassador to the U.S. went on our TV, despite Britain is making this whole, coziness with Zelensky. Even the king met him at his residence. And so did, Starmer met him at his residence. And they promised more money. They're going to do what we say. Same with all the rest of Europe. They have what we do, they follow. They know that they don't have the real capacity for independence, which I don't think is a good thing. I'm not doing this to mock Europe. I'm just saying they're hoping that they can complain and nag us into doing what they want, and they're dealing with new leadership, and so it's no longer going to work. So now we're going to go to Preston's question about right-wing support for Ukraine. What do you think of right-wing Ukraine supporters, not neocons, but actual far-right people who support Ukraine? I get their arguments that Russia isn't based and supports global left-wing anti-colonial movements, but just don't get why that means we have to support and fund Ukraine. What are the reasons for certain right-wingers taking this position? Also, to add to this, do you think the Euro bashing, I think he meant bashing, by a lot of conservatives is a bad look and could alienate European nationalists? Well, I think right now it's primarily Euros who are into Ukraine, because with the Americans, there was a strange group with Americans who were really, far right supporters. There was certain kind of neo-Nazi. I remember Blood Tribe were really into Ukraine because, well, a few of their members, there was a guy with like tattoos all over his face and stuff. I think his name was like Bonehead or something, who had actually been in Ukraine. Some of the other associates were there. So there was that commonality. But online, all the guys who were really into Ukraine and were like not Europeans were like very strange. Generally, their chief reason for it, if you're American, for being really into Ukraine, there was two groups. There was some of these old boomer conservative types who still believed in their foreign policy and stuff. Like Steve Saylor was a moderate Ukraine supporter, and some of those guys, I'm not calling him a boomer conservative, but he's he holds to a lot of the old ideas that animated conservatism in the Cold War. There's that group, so they're more old timey, but even a lot of those guys moved to being anti-Ukraine. And then there's the guys who are just like pure contrarian, who saw that the rest of the right was anti-Ukraine or sympathetic to Russia, and then they took the opposite position. Generally, when people take positions on the online right, it's to differentiate themselves and to try to own some person that annoys them also on the same sphere. And that was what was the case. A lot of these guys were very strange, though, because you would go into it and there was a certain like homo-fascist element that were all really into Ukraine. So I remember in 2022 when these guys were more around. I haven't seen them in a long time, but I remember in 2022 they were around, and you would see like these guys who were like really into Ukraine, and then you go to their page and it was really fucking bizarre anime shit or anime porn and stuff, and I was like, what the hell is this? And there was a very strange element, but I don't think these people were very much in real life except for Blood Tribe and maybe a few neo-Nazis with connections to Ukraine. But in Europe, it's very much real, and it's very divided. It's always been divided. Eastern European nationalists are all very anti-Russia and pro-Ukraine. All the Finns are as well. And with Western Europe, it becomes more divided. I've seen Germans who are very pro-Russia. I've also seen Germans who are very anti-Russia. Like there was a guy I quote tweeted yesterday who's German who is extremely anti-Russia. A lot of the other Germans I talked to from far right and nationalists are not pro-Ukraine, much more sympathetic to Russia. They also view Russia as an ally in helping to make Europe, and particularly Germany, more independent of America. That's the AfD position. So these guys, I feel like in Germany and in France, that's more of a minority position, but in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, it's the majority position among nationalists to be very anti-Russia and pro-Ukraine. So I think with Europeans, they have legitimate reasons to, take a strong stance in this conflict. Scandinavia and Eastern Europe view, with the exception of Hungary and a few other countries, but by Eastern Europe, I primarily mean Poland and the Baltic states. They view Russia as their main enemy. And they have much of their historic identity is based in opposition to Russia. Finland, Poland, and the Baltic states were controlled by Russia and were effectively, Russia was trying to eliminate their identity with Russification campaigns in the last years of the Tsarist Empire. So they are very much, their identity is based on being hostile towards Russia. And they very much fear Russia intervention. And they've had, recent occurrences of this. Finland and Russia fought during World War II. They had both the Winter War and then the Continuation War. The Baltic states were conquered by the Soviet Union and then made a part of the USSR, and then Poland and the rest of Eastern Europe were effectively colonized by Soviet Union and public governments were placed. So they very much have a real reason to be hostile towards Russia and to favor the West. And I understand where they're coming from, why they're this, because they view Russia as the main enemy. That is, very much animates who they are. It animates their identity. That's why they want to, ensure that Russia faces defeat here, because they always fear that Russia might come after them next. I think this fear is overstated or is given too much air. I think if we've seen the war so far is that Russia doesn't really have the capacity to take over the rest of Eastern Europe. And I think that they're going to just stick with whatever they're given in a peace deal. They wanted to bring Ukraine back to the sphere. And I think if they had had a successful war at the beginning where they immediately had taken Kiev in a few weeks and the government was toppled and they were able to place a public government there, I could understand the Baltic states and Poland and maybe even other parts of Eastern Europe worrying. Hungary is pro-Russia, by the way, and Bulgaria and some of the other states, have it's more complex, but they do generally have historical grievances against Russia, and they do fear this. Even Finland fears this, and Scandinavia shares the rest of the Scandinavian countries. Norway and Sweden also have. Being closer in their borders to Russia also has fears over this. But with Western Europeans, I think it's similar to America. It more is about their connection with certain neo-Nazi scenes that are tied in with Azov and other matters. But I think with most of the majority of them, with French, German, Italians, Britain, it's a little bit different, but those three states, the majority of them have pro-Russia, but there is a contingent that's very anti. I mean, even with Germans, they suffered under a horrible Soviet occupation, and then they had a public government installed in Germany, and so a lot of them have historic memories of their relatives getting ethnically cleansed from what is now Poland. By Soviet troops and by Russian troops, and horrible things were done to their grandmothers and other things. So they still view Russia as the enemy as well, but I think most Germans have overcome that. But so that's only speaking of Europeans. For everyone else, for Americans, it's simply just being contrarian. The arguments for them are that it's either contrarian or they have close connections with Ukrainian nationalists, which is that some of these groups from the older alt-right, they had made connections with the Ukrainian nationalists. They had been welcomed there, they'd given speeches there, and so they feel an obligation to support them. But for most people you're going to see online, it's pure contrarianism towards the rest of the right, which ultimately animates a lot of our discussions in our sphere. Now on Preston's final part of his question, is this going to alienate European nationalists? It's just things on Twitter. I mean, they're going to have to accept these matters. I think it's the people a lot of these European right-wingers are either agreeing with what Trump is doing, like Sellner and a lot of these other German-speaking nationalists, and France. France, they do not follow right-wing Twitter as much as the German-speaking nationalists seem to follow American right-wing Twitter more than any of the other non-English-speaking Europeans. The ones who are really following it are not that involved in their politics. Like the Finns who are on right-wing Twitter are not involved in any of the things going on in Finland. It's the same with the other, and all these people are really pro-Ukraine are not really involved in politics in their actual countries. They're just posting, and they're on right-wing Twitter, and it pisses them off that guys that they were shit posting with don't have the same views of Russia as they do. So it doesn't matter if we're alienating them. The only ones who matter are the ones who are involved in their parties and stuff, and most of the ones who are Germans, who are in the German-speaking countries, Austria and Germany, seem to agree with our takes, so we're not really alienating them. And the French don't follow Anglo Twitter. They refuse to. They refuse to. Most of them refuse to follow anything that's English in the English language, out of their own cultural ethnocentrism or their cultural pride or whatever. So you don't really have to worry about them. I don't think it's alienating them. I think it's telling the people, most European nationalists know that the message is directed to the Eurocrats that they also oppose, to the globalists and the liberals who control their countries. They know it's not directed to them, and so it doesn't matter as much. The ones who are getting upset are not the ones involved in their parties and their politics in their countries. They're just fellowship posters who are then saying, like, you're alienating us. But then these guys are like talking about how like they need to disenfranchise like middle America and these people suck. They're just a bunch of rubes and they're hillbillies. Their only purpose is to give Ukraine more money. They just view us as a pay pig. And I even had guys who have had on this podcast who are just like, well, America's finished, so you shouldn't give a shit about your own country. What you should give a shit about is ensuring that these ethnically homogenous European countries survive. And so that's really the only point of America, is to continue to give money to Ukraine. And I'm like, this is like, first off, all these fucking countries, you are not our boss. You are weak countries that live at our behest. Okay? We provide free defense and most of your military hardware. You don't have the ability to defend your own countries. That's a fact. The fact that you get to have these girl boss led states that are pretty ethically homogenous, but then you're electing some bimbo who's out getting drunk and fucking other dudes that is like not her husband, like it was like the Finnish PM, and then they're like doing all this idiotic green policy. These are not like ideal states. I mean, they're nice, they're much nicer to live in than say Atlanta or certainly Memphis or Baltimore. No one's ever going to deny that, but these are, they're not our primary concern. And if you want to defend your countries and to keep out Russia, you're going to have to take power in your hands and form a much better Europe to take care of defense needs. You can no longer get the free ride from America. I don't think it's in our interest, and I think Americans are right to take the lectures from Europe, because the European lectures are far more insulting than what we're telling Europeans. Europeans, we're telling them facts. And I think some people take it a little overboard, but then Europeans just like say, fuck your country sucks, you're a bunch of hillbillies, you're a bunch of idiots, you're inferior to us, you need to give money to superior Ukraine? No. This is not how it is. We don't want lectures anymore. It's not in our interest. It's not even in Europe's interest. If Europe actually wants a better continent, they're going to need to be more independent and less dependent on America anyway. But they refuse to do so. So it's up to them. If they want to continue the Ukraine war, go ahead. I don't think they're not going to do it, as I said on the timber tantrum earlier. But no, I think I don't worry about the European bashing. The people we're offending are just fellowship posters, not people in the parties. And generally what they're saying about America is far worse than what we're saying about Europe. That's my opinion. It makes the inner patriot come out when I see these comments. But we're going to go to Preston's other question. He says, what do you think Elon Musk's long-term goals are in politics? He seems to be spending way more time on it than his businesses, and even if he secures benefits for his companies, it can't be worth the amount of time and money he's spending away from them. Do you think he really cares about politics and views it as a hobby? Also, what are his long-term goals after the Trump administration? Does he want to stay involved or maybe get more involved in other countries? Also, as a Texas resident, could he run for governor or senator of Texas? He's not going to run for office. It'd be very hard for him to run for office anyway. And he has more power. There's some people who always have these ideas. It's like, why don't you run for office and stuff? Or even some people are wondering, like, who are very influential, like commentators or anything. I'm not saying me, but I know other people like, hopefully they get in the admin. It's like, hopefully Tucker can get a job in the cabinet. It's like, no, these guys have far more influence by being outside of, like, having these formal positions. Like, Elon is the second most powerful man in America. Some might even argue he's the most powerful man in America. If he became governor or senator, he would lose that power. So why would he do that? No, he has more power. I mean, he has tremendous influence over the Republican Party. He's not going to run for office. It is a common thing. I always see this like with people. I remember when people were like, Trump should run for governor before running for president. It's like, yeah, I'm sure he's going to become governor of New York. These people have far more power outside of politics. The only way they can get more power, the only way that Musk could have more power is if he was president, which he can't be because he wasn't born in the country, in America. So he can never be president. So right now he has as much power, and he doesn't want to do the day-to-day shit that comes with governor or senator. He's not going to do that. So I don't know if he has particularly long-term goals. I think he's just kind of like become obsessed with this topic and with downsizing the government, and this is what he wants to do. And I don't know what his long-term goals are in politics. I think I don't think he has really thought through it. I think it's just that this has become an obsession with him, and he feels that this is a higher calling and he must do this. I mean, he is autistic, and so this has become his obsession, and he thinks that he's making America and the world a better place through Doge. So I don't think he has long-term goals. I think that he's very focused on the short term, and he's just winging it. And so far, it's doing pretty well. But I think he's, and you can even tell his politics will shift over time, but just like a video or a tweet he sees. So I don't think he has real long-term political goals. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It might even be a good thing. So, but no, he's absolutely not going to run for office. He has more power. I mean, very few Americans have had as much power as he's had. And in terms of like not being president, he's probably one of the most powerful Americans to ever exist outside the president of the United States. So that's something, he might not have this power in a year, but we'll see. So I think it is, I don't think it's something he's going to give up. We got a question from Riggs. He says he read the article about the New York Times Magazine piece about Denmark. Got me thinking, why don't we have these type of leftists in the U.S.? And by Denmark, they have a left-wing government that's restricting immigration. Specifically, I'm thinking of people like Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany and Mette Frederiksen, both of whom are economically left in favor of generous welfare states but are against mass immigration. It seems like the last major American leftist to flirt with this type of ideology was Bernie Sanders of his open borders or Koch brothers scheme days, but even Bernie ultimately acquiesced to the Democrats on that issue. How successful would the Democrats be if they adopted a platform like the Social Democrats in Denmark, one that is pro-welfare and social safety nets, but light on identity politics and against mass immigration? What is the likelihood they go in that direction anytime soon? They would actually fail here in America because of the demographics. I mean, when you're in an ethnically homogenous country like Denmark, and you're primarily, you still have that core white working class support, and they're all pissed off about immigrants taking their jobs, then you can gain support and even some support from the middle class. Problem is the Democratic Party does not benefit from immigration restriction, both from they're increasingly a coalition of college-educated liberals who are not really competing against immigrants, or they don't think they are. I mean, they sort of are with H-1B visas. Blacks who prefer welfare, I mean, they're the ones losing the jobs, but they don't seem to give a shit about this. They're just like, as long as we get welfare and affirmative action, this is what we care about. And then it's the immigrants themselves. It's Hispanics and others. I mean, now a lot of the Hispanics are moving over, but, they don't like immigration restriction. And they're also increasingly getting a lot of these college-educated Asians who fully support immigration, as well as a lot of other. It's a different constituency. I think a lot of the people who people really want this, or certain people want this. This is a very popular commentator idea. It's the same with like never Trump Republicanism, is that it has a high degree of popularity among the pundit class, but actually if it was proposed in the real world, it wouldn't be that popular. Now, I would say this. There's a way for Democrats to moderate on this immigration position where they wouldn't go in the full restrictionist direction of Denmark. Denmark has a very restrictive policies. I mean, they are very strong on immigration there. It's even stronger than even a lot of Republicans would want to go. Democrats would never go in that direction. But there is a way where they're like, we believe in border security. We believe in deportations. They pretty much just have to enforce the laws on the books. And that would be enough for them to do well in elections. Because there's a lot of middle class voters who, voted for Trump, and working class voters who voted for Trump simply because Democrats' policy was like, open borders. We're going to let over 10 million illegals into this country. We're not going to do anything about it. As long as they're deporting illegals and securing the border, that's it. The Bernie Sanders stuff, it's a little, people are really into, it's more right wingers want to believe this more than the left. The actual left-wing supporters care more about punishing white America than they do about protecting working class jobs. This is the same with the Chapo cells and all those types. They want to own white America, and they view immigration as a way to do so. And Bernie Sanders is like open borders, our Koch brothers scheme was never a popular line with the left. It was a very type of old line left where, most of his concerns with amnesty were about guest worker visas. He did come out against amnesty in the late 2000s, but he supported the 2013 amnesty. He got on board with that. So people want to imagine that more than that. But I think it's the fact of how the Democratic Party is structured, their constituencies, their interests. Labor unions are still there, but labor unions view immigrants as future members of the union rather than depending on the jobs. Because the unions are dominated by public sector teachers unions, both of which don't give a shit about immigrants, or they're very pro-immigration. The traditional blue-collar unions are not in control of organized labor, and even a lot of them have been convinced that, these are future union members, so we can help unionize them rather than worry about them competing with their jobs. And in any case, a lot of white working class voters are culturally Republican voters, and they have very different interests than the working class of Europe, because they're not invested in unions. A lot of them are more into owning their own small business, or into entrepreneurship, or to gaining status within America's capitalist system, much more than Europeans are. So I just don't think it would work here, unless you just mean basically Obama's immigration policy, which even he had a liberal immigration policy, but he still sort of enforced border patrol, backed border patrol, and he did deport immigrants. That would be enough to win over independent voters. But to go full on restrictionist, Democrats are never going to do that. That would be very, very unpopular with their core voters. And it's not what the Democratic Party is about. It wants to radically, most of their, and even the leftists who back Bernie, their main concern was owning white America than, having a generous, or having American Denmark. So that is my answer to Riggs. Let's see who's next. Maverick will go on thoughts on Congressman Brandon Gill. He seems to be the most vocally America First Republican in Congress. The funny thing about him is he is Dinesh D'Souza's son-in-law, and he is going off about immigration, wanting to deport Ilhan Omar, and saying very right-wing things. I think it's likely his wife, and maybe even Dinesh, red pilling him. He probably has all these staffers who are showing him a ton of stuff from right-wing Twitter and other things, and he's getting really into this stuff, and he's being advised in a correct manner. So I'm pro Brandon Gill. I think it's good that we have someone articulating this stuff, and he's not as clownish as MTG. Boebert was even too stupid to ever even try to say this stuff. But MTG would get into this stuff. It used to be MTG would stress these ideas, but she was too clownish, and it was mixed in with a lot of MTG-isms. I think it's much better that we have Brandon Gill stressing this stuff. But a lot of these senators and congressmen are wanting to get into right-wing Twitter stuff because they see that there's a lot of power into it. They see how they can gain a standing, that it feels like it's important for their political career to be on the right side of right-wing Twitter, and so they're more engaging with these ideas. So I think it's a very positive development that Brandon Gill is taking stuff from right-wing Twitter and then tweeting it out and then stating these ideas. And I think he's much better than MTG, who would also do this stuff, but then she remember the time she got really into national divorce? Like, there was a lot of silliness involved with MTG. We're going to go with Hornet, who also has a question about a lawmaker, a Republican with Indian connections. He's like, can you explain how Bobby Jindal was elected governor of Louisiana twice? I feel like an Indian person getting elected governor as a Republican of the Deep South is kind of unexpected. The only memory I have of him is running for president in 2016 when he seemed like a pretty boring candidate. So I was just wondering how this person had a successful political career. Well, one, he went by Bobby, not by his Indian name. And he adopted a Southern accent, and he got, I'm pretty sure he was Catholic too, so he wasn't Hindu. He converted. And it's the same with Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley, I think the average South Carolina voter didn't realize she was Indian. With Bobby Jindal, it's clear he's brown. Well, with Nikki Haley, you're like, well, is she really? She could pass as white. Bobby Jindal couldn't. But he just made himself appealing to Southerners. I think some people have like this feeling that like Southerners are like gonna be like, boy, I ain't gonna vote for that Hindu or Indian. But they're really won over by this stuff. If you come out with the right act for them with a Southern voice, you're like, I'm Bobby Jindal, I'm a devout Christian, and I tell you what, I'm tired of this big government. They're like, boy, that brown guy speaks a lot of truth. I remember it in Tennessee. I think this had to be 2020. Yeah, 2020. That primary was pitting Bill Hagerty versus an Indian, and the Indian was running as the conservative guy. It was a very close primary. And so all these guys who are like, talking a Southern accent and deep drawl were backing the Indian guy who was running as a conservative. I mean, there is a way to win over. You got to be Christian. You've got to have an easily pronounceable first name at least. And you've got to talk on the draw. And that's also what Nikki Haley did. And Indians, like the thing about Indians is they're experts at ass kissing. And they're experts at figuring out how to win over audiences to them. And South, it's very, unfortunately for the South, they're very much taken into this stuff. They might like have problems with Indians, but then they are also taken as like, oh, that's our non-white guy. And Bobby Jindal was presented as the Republican answer to Obama. They were obsessed with finding the Republican answer to Obama. They still are with like J.D. Vance. They still want the Republican Obama. And they thought it was Bobby Jindal. Then they realized he wasn't very charismatic and not a good speaker. Then they thought it was Marco Rubio. And he didn't really work out. There was even the sort of that Ted Cruz was the Republican Obama. And so it's never really worked. But Bobby Jindal, it makes sense. He knew how to appeal to that Southern audience. They're not as racist as you might think in the South. And they really are taken in by this stuff. There's just a few things you have to do to win them over. You got to be Christian. Like Vivek, like the funny thing about Vivek is when he was stating, Vivek definitely wishes he had converted to Christianity rather than being Hindu, because this is definitely going to impact his ability to succeed in Republican politics. And also Vivek should have chosen, he should have gone by Victor or something and started going by a different nickname. It's hindering. I think it's hindering his ability. Vivek. I know everyone doesn't like Vivek, but Vivek has a whole lot more charisma and intelligence than Bobby Jindal and Nikki Haley. And the problem is different. But Bobby Jindal and Nikki Haley were able to appeal to themselves through getting a Southern accent, getting an easily pronounceable name, being Christian, and knowing how to appeal to their audience. And you could definitely, there's been a lot of other attempts. Tennessee almost had an Indian senator. So it's actually quite easy. Even with like in Kentucky with the Daniel Cameron guy, who's, a different type of non-white. Some people were like saying, well, I think it's a lot of these voters not wanting to vote for a black guy who's married to a white woman. 20 years ago, true. Now, not true. I think Daniel Cameron, I think he's going to run for McConnell's seat. I think he probably will. If he wins the primary, he's going to easily win that. They no longer care about this stuff in the South. I mean, it's like even Tim Scott. They love Tim Scott. And early in his political career, I mean, there is the worries about what his sexuality is, but I think it's primarily that he preferred white women, didn't want to marry a black woman, and he was unmarried for a long time. And I think in the time he was building up his career in the 2000s, it was still a problem for him to be married to a white woman. 2020s, no longer a problem. He now marries a blonde. Just what it is. Gender wasn't that boring of a candidate compared to like some of these guys who run for governor who are like, you hear them talk and they're like, go to sleep. You know, it's like Bill Lee in Tennessee. You know, there's a lot worse candidates you can imagine. So he was pretty charismatic as far as some of these southern governors go. 2, did you watch the Oscars? Have you seen any of the movies that were nominated? I wanted to watch The Brutalist, but apparently there are some gay scenes, so I'm out. I did not watch any of the Oscars. I saw about it. I know people are really into Nora, and I'm like, I watched the trailer. I'm like, why are people into this movie? I did not watch any of the Oscars. I think the Oscars are losing their cultural cachet because I grew up watching. I mean, it's a little okay, but I mean, it was a much bigger deal to watch the Oscars as a kid than it is now. The Oscars, they would nominate these movies that people have seen. The problem with the Oscars now is that all these movies winning, nobody has fucking seen. None of the average person has not seen Honora or knows what the hell Honora is. And they certainly didn't see the trans musical either. So and I don't even think Brutalist was a lot of those movies that were nominated, no one had seen. and it's becoming more of a problem as time goes on. It becomes more niche. It's less of a cultural focus. It's less of a cultural event. And you still have to watch the Oscars because there are events that happen that shape the culture, like Will Smith slapping Chris Rock, which that was all we could talk about for over a week. That was like, I guess, how long ago was that? That was like 2 or 3 years ago. That was a while ago. Time flies by when you're being keyed. But it's not the cultural event it once was. The reason why they expanded it years ago to 10 movies was that they wanted to have movies that people have seen. But now they're now having like 10 movies that no one has seen. So it's becoming a problem. I don't think I saw any of the movies that were nominated for the Best Picture this year. There's some movies, I mean, I'd probably watch Honora. I've heard good things about Brutalist. I'm not going to watch the trans musical, despite the lead actor turning out to be right wing. I don't think I'm going to watch it. Everyone says it's terrible. It was supposed to win before the lead actor old tweets came out, so then they went to Nora. But it is. I mean, the movie industry is just changing. They're having a general problem is that no one is seeing movies anymore like they were 20 years ago. And so it's becoming a problem for the industry. I mean, even when Quentin Tarantino is like saying movies are over, you know, there are deeper problems within the industry. So that's my answer to that. Let's go to Sharecrop. Sharecrop's got 3 quick questions. When I think of your show, I think of commentary on current events and culture and your IQ summits on American history from the Civil War to civil rights. Do you have much interest in history from before the American Revolution? Absolutely. We just haven't really covered it yet. But we'll be covering that stuff more in the future. I stay away from believing, second question, I stay away from believing Alex Jones type stuff, but alternative history can be fun to consider. Hyperborea and Atlantis are big memes with the online right. Do you subscribe to any fringe theories? I'm open to the Atlantis stuff, and also that a lot of the old ancient civilizations were crafted by people that would be called white today. But I haven't really invested much into it, so that would probably be the only fringe theories I'm into. 3, I like the Victor Davis Hanson podcast. Besides him mentioning Israel at least once an episode, he loves Trump and has some pretty rational opinions and articulates his ideas very well. He's also a savant professor in Greek and Roman classics and World War II. Anyway, do you subscribe to any other podcasts besides HighlyRespected.com? Here is a important fact. I'm going to give you a confession. Despite being a podcaster, I do not listen to any other podcasts. I try to. It's not for any reasons that I hate podcasts or things. It's just how I take in information. When I'm working throughout the day, writing or whatever, I listen to music. I don't listen to podcasts because generally when I listen to podcasts, I zone out and then I'm like, well, what are they talking about now? So it's much easier to do with that with music where I don't have to pay attention the whole time, just something playing in the background. While when it's a podcast, I'm not soaking it in, and then like they're talking about something and I'm like, wait a minute, what are they talking about? And I have to fully focus on it. But then I just don't like it. I prefer music. And I'm better when I want to learn something, I read. I'm more textual learner than a audio learner. So that's just how people are. I know a lot of people are like that. So obviously, no offense to podcast listeners as I'm talking to you on a podcast, but I don't listen to really any other podcasts. I sometimes do if there's something very interesting and I make myself listen, but no, I don't. I generally read. So that's how I get information. Now we have a question from a new Cognitive Leap member. We have a question from Visu. Visu asks, he's got two questions. One, since you're getting all these ranking requests lately, is there any subject you would actually want to rank? Probably operas or albums, That's probably stuff. I probably wouldn't put them in order, but I can say like top 10 albums. I've done that before on Twitter. So music I would probably do ranking. Two, you did an IQ supplement on Jesse James recently, and I was wondering what your thoughts are on the film The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. I've been meaning to watch it, but I've never seen the movie before, so I cannot give my full thoughts on that movie, unfortunately. Now we got two questions from New England Refugee. New England Refugee has, I think right now would be the only time we can pass English as the national language. Can we wrap it up in the reconciliation? Probably not. I don't know if the Senate parliamentarian would allow that because it has to be things related to the budget. I mean, maybe they could convince, put it in there, but I don't think they're going to do that. No, I mean, they could try. It probably would be fairly popular, but I don't know. It's, the executive order on Trump is out there. I mean, they already sort of did that, so they might feel they don't need to, but maybe they could put it in reconciliation, but I feel like the parliamentarian would rule against it. Everything in the reconciliation has to be approved by the parliamentarian, and it has to be narrowly relating to the budget. Maybe they could say it's like, this is about funding for things for the government and we're trying to save money. I don't know. They probably can't do that in the budget. Maybe, but I doubt it. So a second question is, quick thought on the House GOP Epstein files Rickroll. People said it was insensitive, but I thought it was kind of funny. Entertainment is politics. I thought it was fun. This whole thing is a clown show, okay? The way they handed out the Epstein files that had already been public, it's turning into just a slop fest for, the MAGA boomers. And I think it was funny to make light of it. So it is what it is. I don't even think there is an Epstein list, or at least they don't have it. So they're just trying to say, really what they want is like Tom Hanks is on the Epstein file list and all these guys, and they're like, we can finally cancel the libtards. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think the Rickroll is fine. The thing is, the whole thing, like the worst thing was like how they handed it off to the influencers, and the influencers all smiling and stuff, and you're like, I don't think this is best optics. So it's been, it was too much of a clown show with the rollout. So I think the GOP committee doing a Rickroll was fine. Was okay. Was a little bit of an old meme, but it was funny for the moment. I think people were flipping out too much over it. So I think I'm gonna wrap up with a few more questions. Let's see who else we've got. No questions from Mishaus today. Where's Mishaus? People are going to be frantic because I know there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast just for what Mish House has to say, and there is no Mish House. We're wondering where he's at. Hopefully, he'll come through for the mailbag with some more classic Mish House questions. But we do have some questions from Ken. I'm going to just answer one. I think I'm going to leave the other two for... Actually, one, no. Actually, he asked me what were my thoughts on the Oscars, so I'll wrap this up. For his third question, and he said, do you prefer the theatrical or extended editions of the Lord of the Rings films? I prefer the theatrical. The extended editions, they drag on. You can see that a lot of these things slow down the pace of the movie. I mean, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings guy, so I like seeing the scenes, and watching, you've got to watch them once just to see the scenes. But the theatrical editions are better. They flow much better. They're just better films. The extended editions, they make them drag on. You can see that there's a lot of superfluous stuff in there. There's some cool stuff. I think the Mouth of Sauron scene, there's a few things in there like Mouth of Sauron, Saruman's death, a few other things that I think would make the film better. Or the theatrical films better, but most of what's included are unnecessary and hinder the flow of the film. So I prefer the theatrical. So I gave my thoughts on this year's Oscars as well. And a previous question, I might as well answer all his questions. So I'm going to do. They're a quick question. So he said, you mentioned in your answer to someone's mailbag question about the TSA that there's more crazy people today. My question is when, why, and how did so many people lose their minds? I don't really know how to be more specific about it, what I mean by crazy, but it just seems like people of all races, classes, creeds are just more insane today than they were even 10 or 20 years ago. COVID. Easy. COVID. People have not recovered from being forced to be in their homes and their whole lives disrupted, and a lot of other things. COVID has made people more crazy, especially with young kids. I mean, a lot of these guys are turning into mass shooters is because, when they're in middle school or elementary school, when they were supposed to be at school and playing on the playground, and I don't know if they're not playing on the playground in middle school, but when they're socializing every day with other kids and that's completely disrupted, now they're like, they were, when they're 11, they're spending all their time online. That's made them much more messed up. And that's the same with a lot of other people. No, people have definitely lost their minds since COVID, and a lot of our society has not recovered from COVID yet. So that has generally made people more insane. If you could pinpoint the one factor that it is, it's definitely COVID and the lockdowns. I think people have settled down a little bit, but there's like a lot lingering long-term problems, particularly among young people. And that's why we're getting more insane school shootings where it's like they're getting on a Discord and it's completely insane. And then they're getting psyoped into going to do a school shooting. So, and we're going to be seeing, unfortunately, a lot more of that in the future. And I think this is a result of COVID. The second question, what happened to rock music? I saw some posts this weekend that spun out of a magical complaint that white guys need to start making music like that of the All America Rejects and not trying to become underground rappers. I'll get to my viewpoint on All America Rejects in a moment. Respondents laid the blame for this trend at the Obama era, culturally dismissing any sort of art that comes from a space of white male angst as well as the culture industry and the music industry itself, not funding quintessentially white genres anymore, other than country. What do you think? I just think rock music, a lot of it, got played out. There was not much newer stuff to do with rock music. And the rock music that we came down to, everyone hates. It was either haste, clap, stomp, or stomp, clap, hey, Mumford and Sons shit, or it was Imagine Dragons, and everyone hates Imagine Dragons now. And even like other bands are following it from the 2000s. There were like Fall Out Boy and some others came back and they're doing all Imagine Dragons style stuff. I don't want music to return to All American Rejects. I'd much rather have Bro Country or Morgan Wallen All American rejects, please don't subject our country to this anymore. I think the 2000s nostalgia is a little bit misplaced. All this stuff was like very effeminate too. It was like these guys were, unlike the rock music of the 80s or even like grunge, like because grunge was seen as like anti-machismo, but these guys still had masculine attributes. The 2000s rock music was very effeminate. Either it was emo, which is like very effeminate, or indie rock. It was all like complete rejections of masculinity, of traditional masculinity. I have an article coming out tomorrow about the hipster nostalgia, which will cover some of this stuff. But and even like All American Rejects, it was like very feminine. I mean, like fraternity guys and like preppy like athletes aren't gonna listen to this shit. It felt like something was going wrong there. But a lot of women like this stuff. So a lot of women, and they're not really into rap, and so they now finally look on emo and some of the scene stuff, and they're like, oh, I wish this could come back. But I don't think the audience is there anymore for it. Zoomers are listening to stuff that's way different. And they're unfortunately getting into new metal and stuff like that. They haven't made it to the late 2000s yet. They're in the early 2000s with, I think, new metal. I think pop punk's having a resurgence as well. So maybe they'll get to the mid to late 2000s at some point, and indie rock and emo will make a comeback. But I don't think this stuff's really good. If you're gonna have white male angst, let's get some metal. Let's get some masculine music in there, not this effeminate shit like All American Rejects. That's the type of angst you want, like the violence and like I'm gonna kill you type of energy of metal, not the like I'm crying energy of All American Rejects. So that's my thought on it. It's not a popular opinion. I know a lot of people like this music, but I was never that fond of it. I don't really want to come back for this music. So who else do we got? I might conclude on K-Max. K-Max has another question. So if I did not get to you, please message me, email me to harass me that I did not get to your questions. So off your recent segment on Marcus Garvey, the dream of a mass separation coming is nothing but a pipe dream. I guess he means black separation. Despite Trump's winning, making actress KJ Smith declared blacks need to move out of America and into another country. This never happens in mass numbers. It's listed as a question. No matter the situation or who is presiding, they still prefer to stay and demand reparations, affirmative action, and special set-asides for their group while complaining about white supremacy endlessly. Yes, absolutely. They're not going to seriously move to Africa. It's just a way of them complaining and demanding and hoping that they guilt whites into giving them more stuff. They're no longer serious about this stuff. It's just now just random celebrities saying, like, let's move to Africa. Occasionally there are, like, well-off blacks who can work remotely. We'll put work in quotation marks. And they move to Africa or somewhere else in Europe. There was this huge trend in the early 2020s. They still have a few of these articles like, blacks are leaving America. They're like, the racism is too much. Like, after George Floyd, I just had to leave. But it was only like a middle class element that is similar to a lot of the white middle class expats that are leaving that can work remotely and make money in a cheaper location. And they were generally not going back to Africa. They were like moving to Portugal and like France and stuff. They were not going to Africa. They were going to the same places white expats were moving to. But they're like, I just can't deal with American racism. And it's the same with like even KJ Smith. I mean, she elaborated on her thoughts, and she's like, well, Africa is now offering these generous, benefits to immigrate there, so maybe blacks should take that. But they don't actually immigrate to Africa. They immigrate to the same places that all other American expats do, but then they give the added reason that, like, we can't handle white racism. It's just not. It's a pipe dream now, so... And no one's really into it. They're more into just securing racial quotas, affirmative action, and reparations in America. So that is it for Highly Respected today. We're going to have more great content coming up this week, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.